People in our country illegally can self-deport the easy way, or they can get deported the hard way, and that's not pleasant.
Thousands of legal immigrants from Cameroon just got a one-way ticket to a war zone, signed by the US government. But these are the same people who were promised refuge. So, why would a country that promises refuge now deport people into chaos? Let's find that out. They were legal. That's the part no one wants to say out loud when discussing the 8,000 Cameroonians now marked for removal. Not illegal, not undocumented, legal. And that's exactly what makes this betrayal so much worse. Because in a country obsessed with law and order, these Cameroonians did everything the law asked of them. They didn't jump fences. They didn't dodge paperwork. They came through proper channels and applied for something the US proudly called humanitarian protection, temporary protected status. And they got it fair and square. But here's where the system reveals its trap. Legality isn't about protection. It's about control. And the more legal you are, the easier you are to track, to label, and, when the headlines need distraction, to sacrifice. This isn't some obscure immigration ruling buried in legal jargon. This is a signal, one that says, even if you're legal, we can erase you, and no one will stop us. The message is clear. In Trump's America, being legal doesn't make you safe. It makes you visible, and visibility makes you vulnerable. But let's ask, why now? What changed between the day TPS was granted and the day it was revoked? Did Cameroon suddenly become a democratic utopia? Did the separatist war end? Did mass displacement, political arrests, and extrajudicial killings disappear overnight? None of that changed. What changed was political momentum. Trump's second term is about one thing: unapologetic domination of immigration policy, not just at the border, but in every corner of legality. From visa bans to asylum cuts to green card freezes, the goal is to erase gray areas and force everything into black and white binaries. You belong or you don't. You're useful or you're not. You're white and favored or you're expendable. And TPS, it's the softest target. Why? Because it was never meant to be permanent. It was built as a temporary fix for humanitarian disasters, war, famine, and earthquakes. So all you have to do is pretend the disaster is over, and suddenly you've got 8,000 people you can toss out without violating the rules. That's the trick. They're not breaking the law. You're changing the definition of what the law protects. Homeland Security's new rationale is that Cameroon no longer meets the criteria for TPS. Translation: we decided you don't qualify anymore. No tribunal, no new evidence. Just a political decision dressed up as administrative housekeeping. But what they don't say is this: the criteria didn't change. Only the will to protect did. And here's how you know it's political. Even the US government's travel advisories still warn Americans to stay away from large swaths of Cameroon. Think about that. It's too dangerous for tourists, but fine to deport civilians into. That's not just hypocrisy. That's premeditated abandonment. Because the truth is, these Cameroonians were never meant to be permanent. Not in the eyes of the system. They were useful while silent, invisible while working low-paying essential jobs, welcome while filling hospital shifts and warehouse roles during a pandemic. But now, they've outlived their political utility. And worse, they've become inconvenient. And here's where this becomes dangerous for everyone else. If even the legal ones can be discarded, who's left to feel safe? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. This isn't just about Cameroon. This is a test balloon, a message to every other group protected under TPS, Haitians, Salvadorans, Afghans, that their days are numbered too. The language used to end TPS for Cameroon can be copied and pasted into future orders. And if no one pushes back now, who will push back when it's their turn? But that's the genius of it. They count on your silence. They count on the issue being obscure, technical, and buried in the news cycle. That's why the timing was so quiet. No primetime announcement, just a press release. Deportation by design. Not to protect America, but to reshape it. And now that legality has been hollowed out, that TPS is being used as a political stage prop, we're left with the next logical step, the moment where racial hierarchy stops being subtle and becomes the point. Because while Cameroonians are being pushed out under the excuse of improving conditions, other groups with lighter skin and more geopolitical clout are being welcomed in. Why? Let's stop pretending this is about policy. It's about the profile. Because if legality doesn't guarantee protection, then what does? Simple. Appearance, origin, political optics. Let's talk about what nobody wants to say in polite society. TPS is not applied equally. It's a program supposedly built on humanitarian need, but its enforcement reads more like a passport color chart and a pigment scale. Just look at the numbers. In 2022, more than 100,000 Ukrainians were admitted into the United States under a lightning-fast program that bypassed traditional asylum channels. They were granted parole, support services, media coverage, and an entire infrastructure of welcome. No questions asked. In 2025, nearly 8,000 Cameroonians, already vetted, already legal, are being told, your time is up. Same law, same principle, radically different treatment. Let's break it down. Cameroon is still grappling with a brutal internal conflict that has displaced over 1 million people. Amnesty International and the UN still report targeted killings, abductions, and mass arrests. Cameroon is not post-conflict, it is mid-collapse. But Ukraine, despite the ongoing war, despite the volatility of its eastern regions, its citizens are being kept and protected. Rightfully so, war is war. So if the presence of war doesn't disqualify one group, why does it disqualify another? Because in Trump's framework, humanitarianism is not colorblind. It is politically and racially selective, and the data backs it up. Time and again, African and Caribbean nations, Haiti, Sudan, Cameroon, and Ethiopia, face shorter TPS windows, more frequent reviews, and quicker terminations than their European or Latin American counterparts. It's not just who's in danger, it's who looks like danger. There's a hierarchy at play, one that isn't spelled out in legal briefs but is baked into the outcomes. White suffering is a tragedy. Black suffering is a nuisance. White refugees are seen as displaced patriots. Black refugees are seen as burdens to be managed, deported, or delayed. Let's go even deeper. TPS isn't just about war. It's about whether the US wants to be involved in that war. Ukraine is geopolitically valuable. Cameroon is geopolitically invisible. One is a pawn in America's chess game with Russia. The other, just another African state Washington barely remembers unless a general gets assassinated or oil is involved. So Trump doesn't see Cameroonian lives. He sees no leverage, no press value, no campaign points. And that's why they were cut. The logic is chilling, but clear. If your suffering doesn't benefit us, we don't owe you protection. It's not about danger. It's about narrative compatibility. Ukrainian refugees fit the story of Western democracy under siege. Cameroonians do not. They're not media darlings. They're not political weapons. They're disposable, legally clean, politically safe to erase. But here's where it gets even more dangerous. Because once you introduce racial preference into humanitarian law, the whole system breaks. It ceases to be about protecting the vulnerable and becomes about preserving a myth. The myth of America as generous, fair, colorblind. When in reality, it's just selective compassion with a flag on it. And let's not forget the economic angle. Many of the Cameroonians under TPS work in healthcare, logistics, sanitation, and agriculture, industries that kept the US running during the COVID crisis. But now that the crisis is over, so is their welcome. That's not immigration policy. That's labor extraction. They were needed when hospitals overflowed. They were needed when warehouses ground to a halt. But once the masks came off and the profits returned, they became excess inventory. Too black to celebrate, too legal to ignore. And now, Trump's administration is tossing them out like spent batteries, quietly, without a plan, without accountability. Ask yourself this. If these 8,000 Cameroonians were Christian refugees from Poland or blue-eyed dissidents from Belarus, would this conversation even exist? Of course not. They'd be granted protection extensions, celebrated as symbols of courage, and trotted out at press briefings. They'd be heroes, not headlines buried in April. But Cameroonians? They're too easy to scapegoat, too quiet to resist, too distant for the average American to care. And that's exactly why Trump chose them. Because if he can normalize the removal of law-abiding, crisis-fleeing Africans, he can go after anyone next, all while saying it's just the law. But let's be clear. This isn't just about who got deported. It's about what America is becoming. A country where compassion is no longer a value, but a calculation. And now that that calculation has turned cold, the only thing left to confront is the consequence. What happens to these people when the flights take off? Because Trump's gamble isn't just that Americans won't care, it's that they'll never ask. Let's ask anyway. If legality failed these Cameroonians, this next part is even more sinister. Because what the US government is calling a removal is not just a relocation, it's a redelivery into the arms of the same violent machine many of them fled. Let's make one thing clear. Africa is not the problem. Cameroon is not broken. Its people are not helpless. But like too many African nations, it is held hostage by a regime that long overstayed its welcome and continues to silence dissent through brute force. Paul Biya has ruled Cameroon since 1982, one of the longest-running dictatorships in the world. Under his watch, journalists vanish, protesters are crushed, and those who speak against the regime, even from abroad, are labeled enemies of the state. This is not African instability. This is manufactured repression, propped up for years by Western silence, diplomatic immunity, and foreign business interests. And now, after years of looking away, the US wants to send 8,000 Cameroonians right back into that very system, knowing exactly what happens next. Let's not mince words. Many of these deportees are not just returning citizens. They are exiles, activists, and survivors who raised their voices abroad. Some wrote for diaspora media. Some protested at American embassies. Others simply spoke the truth about what they endured. And that truth is dangerous. Because in the eyes of Biya's regime, returning Cameroonians aren't just migrants, they are traitors. And in a country where dissent is a crime, re-entry becomes a trap. One man deported from Germany in 2022 disappeared upon arrival. Another, a former TPS recipient from Texas, was arrested at Douala International Airport after posting on Facebook about police brutality in Cameroon. His relatives haven't heard from him since. These aren't stories from history. These are stories from last year. And yes, the US government knows all of this. They've read the reports. Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the UN, and even the US State Department's travel advisories confirm what everyone knows. Cameroon's Anglophone crisis is not resolved. Political imprisonment is still rampant. Torture is still in use. Civilians still disappear. The same State Department that warns Americans not to visit Cameroon for fear of arbitrary arrest and violence is now shipping Cameroonian immigrants back by the thousands, as if those dangers only apply to tourists, not to actual citizens whose names are on government watch lists. So let's call this what it is: conscious abandonment. It's not just hypocrisy, it's complicity. And the cost? Real lives, real disappearances. This is not a deportation crisis. It's a moral crisis. And it exposes just how hollow America's humanitarian image is when it comes to Africans. If there were 8,000 Ukrainian refugees, this would be on the front page. If they were white Christians fleeing a dictatorship in Europe, Congress would hold emergency hearings. But Cameroonians, Black, African, and inconveniently political? They're erased quietly. No headlines, no outrage. This isn't about Cameroon being dangerous. It's about the danger of ignoring what powerful men do to protect their thrones, and how the West keeps enabling those thrones. Let's not forget, the Biya regime has survived in large part because Western powers preferred stability over democracy. They closed their eyes while elections were rigged. They shrugged while journalists were jailed. They kept trading oil and timber while whole villages were razed. And now those same powers are deporting political exiles back to the scene of the crime, after benefiting from their labor, their taxes, their trust. It's a pattern that's played out across Africa for decades. First, prop up a dictator, then ignore the fallout. Finally, deport the people who fled that fallout, and pretend it's legal, not lethal. But here's the part Trump's administration didn't expect. Africans are no longer silent. These Cameroonian TPS holders are not statistics. They are nurses, truck drivers, students, parents. They are part of the communities that kept America running during COVID. They paid taxes, followed laws, and believed in the promise of refuge. And now, with no due process, no meaningful appeals, and no political weight behind them, they are being treated like pawns. But pawns don't stay pawns forever, because the African diaspora is watching. African youth on the continent are watching, and they are connecting the dots between authoritarianism at home and disposability abroad. So, no, this isn't about Cameroon being unsafe. It's about Cameroonians being deliberately endangered by a foreign policy that sees African lives as tools to be managed or discarded. And if this is allowed to stand, it won't end with Cameroon. It will spread quietly, bureaucratically, and mercilessly, unless people speak. When a government knowingly deports people into danger and does it anyway, that's not a policy decision. That's a test run. The mass deportation of 8,000 Cameroonians isn't an isolated blunder or an unfortunate case of legal expiration. It's a calculated blueprint, a way to gauge how much cruelty the American public will tolerate when it's neatly dressed as procedure. It's not just about Cameroon. It's about what comes next and who's next in line. Because when silence follows cruelty, the system adapts, and the message becomes louder than any press conference. We can do this. We did it once. We'll do it again. The Trump administration didn't start with Cameroonians because they were the biggest group or the most visible. They started here because this group is strategically expendable, small enough to avoid national backlash, black enough to avoid media overexposure, foreign enough to be misunderstood, and legal enough to set a terrifying precedent. Legality doesn't matter anymore. What they're testing is this: if the public doesn't fight for 8,000 TPS holders, who's going to fight for the next 80,000? This is how authoritarian playbooks are written in democratic ink. The removal of Cameroonians is phase one of something bigger, a full-spectrum rollback of humanitarian pathways under the disguise of immigration reform. This is about erasing the category of the protected immigrant altogether, so that the only choices left are citizen or deportable. And you can already see the shape of the next phases forming. TPS holders from Haiti, El Salvador, Honduras, already on review lists. DACA recipients. Trump's 2024 campaign promised they'd be targeted again. New asylum seekers from climate-struck African and Caribbean countries, set for rejection under new safety designations. What happened to Cameroonians is just the prototype, the legal engineering of what's to come. And don't think for a second this is just about immigration. It's about power consolidation. These policies are part of a larger shift, where executive authority no longer manages immigration law. It replaces it. Where humanitarian exceptions no longer serve as moral guardrails, but as obstacles to be bulldozed. Trump's advisors understand something vital: that immigration isn't just law, it's optics. So they're not trying to fix the system. They're trying to recode it. To make legal presence mean nothing, and humanitarian suffering mean even less. And in that new code, legality becomes a trap, not a protection. You register, you cooperate, you pay taxes, you follow the process, only to be flagged, cataloged, and removed once your usefulness ends. And if you think that ends with immigrants, think again. Because what this system cultivates is obedience through fear. And fear spreads fast. Already, other immigrant communities are watching what's happening to Cameroonians and quietly pulling back, canceling public protests, skipping legal clinics, avoiding press interviews, not because they're guilty, but because they're next. This is how mass compliance is manufactured in democratic societies, not through tanks in the streets, but through invisible systems that target the least defended and dare the rest to speak up. And now that it's clear these deportations aren't about national security, economic burden, or legal violations, we're forced to confront the real motive: control. Because what better way to control a population than by making its most vulnerable members disappear quietly, legally, and in full public view, with nobody stopping it? The removal of Cameroonians under TPS is a political message sent not to them, but to everyone else. It's a warning to other legal immigrants. You are a guest, not a citizen, and you can be erased at will. And if that warning sticks, if it succeeds in silencing others, then this isn't just immigration policy. It's ideological warfare. A war against hope, against justice, against the very idea that law can protect you from power. And what makes it so dangerous is its subtlety. It's not being done with jackboots or shouting. It's being done with paperwork, press releases, and expired deadlines. It's a quiet purge, and it's already happening. So now we're left with a final question. If legality is no longer a shield, if compassion is now conditional, if protection depends on skin tone, timing, and silence, then what exactly is left of America's promise? Because if deporting people into danger is how a nation flexes its strength, then that nation is not strong. It's scared. Scared of humanity. Scared of accountability. Scared of its reflection. Do you think Trump's actions follow human rights guidelines? If not, why is no one speaking up? Let us know in the comments section. Is it time for Africa to finally wake up? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.